Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of an Evolved Review. I am your host, James Caleb Kitchens. I'm joined each and every week by none other than the man who consumes more wrestling content than anyone in the known multiverse, straight from the SWN, Caleb Stovall. Welcome back, Caleb.
Yes, and I'll give you as a hint as to when I saw this documentary, what you think I watched right after I saw this.
Did you watch the actual event?
Yes.
I thought so too. As a matter of fact, I think our guest also watched it, which would mean I'm the only person here who didn't watch the entire event. If I wanted to watch a bunch of people not react, I would watch a Cameron Cade match. That being said, straight from the Double Dropkick Show, welcome back, Heath Mullikin.
Hello. Thanks for having me back on, guys. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, man, I'm glad to have you back here. So, if you guys missed it, in season 2, Heath actually joined myself. We actually did something way out of the norm. We went over Warner Brothers movie slate for the year. That's going to be on HBO Max right after that news broke. So, if you haven't checked that episode out, go check it out. It was a lot of fun. But I'm glad to have you back on for the podcast proper. Tonight, we are talking about our bread and butter. We're talking about Dark Side of the Ring. And this is the very unique Collision in Korea episode. A little bit of housekeeping before we get to the main event. I do want to note that we are also about to do the A&E biography Shawn Michaels episode, if you've been wondering where that is. And then next week, I had a couple of people wondering. Mr. Stovall was one of those people, and I said, oh, man, this is happening. AEW's pay-per-view is this weekend, and I have committed, unfortunately, to reviewing all of those this year. And so I am going to suffer through that. And so next week we're going to combine, and all credit to Caleb Stovall in this, we're going to combine the Dark Side of the Ring and A&E biography Ultimate Warrior episodes. This is a brilliant idea. That way I don't have to talk about the Ultimate Warrior for 3 hours on 2 separate occasions. And then we're going to review the AEW pay-per-view. So it's all coming. It's all coming down the pipe. Guys, I want to get right into this. Start off with you, Heath. This is a guest privilege. We always hit the guest up with the question first. The first time you heard of the Collision in Korea, what did you think about it?
Man, I think back in when it happened, I can't remember. Like, I don't know if I was watching wrestling at that time. So I just remember, hearing about it later. It was like, what was that? What were they thinking? What was the purpose of that? Why did Flair lose to Inoki? And so didn't understand any of that. And then obviously over the last, 20, 30 years, more and more stories have come out about it. But it just seems, I mean, when you're a kid, when you're, 14, 15, 16, you're like, oh, they had a show in North Korea. No big deal. It's like having a show in, Thompson, Georgia. It's, just a normal thing. But obviously it wasn't.
I mean, if I could force everybody in Thompson, Georgia, to attend, I'm not saying I wouldn't if I had the choice. Caleb, what about you, man? What did you first think about this when you heard Collision in Korea as a wrestling event?
So I first heard about this because when I guess this actually happened, I was a kid in '95. I didn't know anything about that. And really, and I was into wrestling, but I didn't really get into wrestling till around around early '95 and '96. But I remember when WCW went out of business, the only way that you could see a WCW event, this was back before it went away completely. They still had VHS tapes, and there was a video store, Hollywood Video. I'll never forget it because at Hollywood Video, or I think it was either Hollywood Video or Video to Go or something like that. But they had a wrestling section and it had all of the WCW events. And so I got the WCW Bash at the Beach 1995 VHS tape because I had never actually seen it. And so I watched that. And at the very end of it, that's when they talked about Collision in Korea. There was an advertisement for it. And so that was the first I had heard of it. I didn't think it was a big deal because nobody else really made it a big deal. Like it was just kind of like, hey, from WCW Home Video, Collision in Korea. All right, cool. Well, you can't find that anywhere or anything like that. So, you know, I didn't really know how big the event was until I watched this. And it actually, before I watched this, I realized it was a bigger event when Eric Bischoff talked about it on 83 Weeks, his podcast with Conrad Thompson.
That was definitely going to come up one way or the other tonight. The 83 Weeks podcast about this, which I invite you to go listen to it if you're interested in the subject. It sheds a lot of light on it. We'll kind of get into our guest speakers a little bit later on. When I first heard about this, I think I was like 8 years old when it happened, right? So it wasn't a big deal to me.
Yeah.
But for me, thinking about it, I think the first time I really heard about this event, I was like, okay, so they did a big event in Korea, whatever. I wasn't thinking that it was in North Korea, of course. I was thinking that they did a big show in South Korea, like whatever. And then I found out that it was in North Korea, like later on as an adult, and I was like, oh shit. North Korea. But yeah, I mean, it seems like it was a terrible event other than like the main, which I did watch. I watched the Inoki and Flair match. If you want to save yourself the trouble, you can watch Triple H and Orton from WrestleMania 25. Same crowd reaction for the whole rest of that. Yeah, this is going to continue all night. I'm going to continue to make comparisons.
You'll never let like WWE live that mania down, will you?
Well, it's a great mania, but it was a horrible main event.
Well, okay, you had to follow Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker.
Well, that's true, but they failed horribly. I mean, if WWE had known how to pipe in crowd noise back then, they would have done it. So
what's crazy is this episode came out and it was like the next day. I shared this in our patrons group for the Double Dropkick Show because somebody posted about it's a tag team match with Kenta Kobashi and another guy and Doug Furnister another guy, and they were just talking about how it's one of the greatest tag team matches ever, and the crowd reaction is the total opposite. I mean, it's like the perfect crowd. So after watching Flair and Inoki to almost no reaction to that, it really put into perspective. It doesn't matter if you have 107,000 people in the arena. If they don't know what they're watching, they don't care, and they're scared for their lives. It doesn't matter.
Right. I mean, I've been at shows where there was 120 people in the audience, and you would have thought it was 500 due to how into it they were. And then, of course, I think we've all probably seen the opposite. I've seen somebody, just stink the place out in front of actually 600 people, and you could have heard a pin drop. So it goes either way. So we set the stage here a little bit. WCW, of course, this is during the Monday Night War kind of era where they're fighting with WWF, and they want to be more international. So they reach out to repair their relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling. And as Eric Bischoff explains in the episode, Inoki is sort of the Vince McMahon of Japan. That's just kind of how it is. He's like the godfather of wrestling over there. And something they didn't explain in the episode that I want to make sure that we make clear here is in Japan, pro wrestling is regarded with a completely different aura than it is in the United States.
Yes.
It is similar to like football here, where people are just absolutely over their heads about it.
Yeah.
And it's a big deal, and they appreciate the art of professional wrestling as well. They of course like their blood and guts, as we know. But there's also a huge appreciation for the art that is professional wrestling, and it's not really from like a dirt sheet perspective, like I gotta be in the know. It's from a reverence for the art type perspective.
Yeah, they view it how I would describe it. They view it as kind of a play. It's like they're not bored at what they are seeing. It might seem like it because they watch it with such silence at times, but that's just them appreciating what the guys are doing in the ring. But at the end of the matches now, when they know that, everything is building up, I mean, they get into it. If you have that crowd, man, their shows are just so awesome. And Antonio Inoki, I want to make clear as well, like he helped start New Japan Pro Wrestling. And
Right.
the tournament where Kenny Omega became a superstar in, I know that hurts you, James, but just go with it on this. Just go with it. All right. Just go with it. Anyways, his face for those who aren't watching on this thing, but the G1 climax where he did become a star in this one, and a lot of other people have won this tournament, including one immortal Hulk Hogan won this tournament, and it was started by Inoki.
You mean to tell me that Antonio Inoki is who I have to blame for Kenny Omega
Well,
being famous?
No, you have to blame Ghetto.
Oh, okay.
and so if for people who are watching this that may not be wrestling fans, you have to understand Antonio Inoki had a match with Muhammad Ali. This guy is a legit athlete. He's a politician, but he is he does not play around. If there's a match line with him, and I can't remember the dude's name. It's a big old fat guy, and the guy doesn't want to work, and Inoki just pummels him. And it is Antonio Inoki is one of the toughest men. And I mean, he could wrestle a guy like Ric Flair for 25, 30 minutes and make it look great. And he could also brawl around the arena with Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen. He's just one of the all-time greats ever in wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of goes back into wrestling, as a culture in Japan. The man's a politician. You really can't do that in the United States. The only person who's managed to do that, two people, Jesse Ventura and Kane, and Jesse Ventura,
Linda McMahon.
Oh, that's true. That's true. We don't have to talk about.
She didn't win though,
and she also wasn't a wrestler, not herself.
Well, yeah, but I mean, she's associated.
That's true. But the only thing, she didn't actually win an election. She was appointed to a cabinet position.
Yeah, it's still politics, though.
Yeah, but I mean, you just cut a check and then you get the job. Yeah. That's how it worked back then. We don't have to get into
Paul Lee tried to do.
That's true. I'm not trying to get into it. I just was throwing her in there.
That's true. I think that's the first time someone has uttered the dark speech of Paul Lee's name on these hallowed grounds. So thank you for that, Heath. We've already mentioned Cameron Cade and Paul Lee in one episode. We've already been canceled. Congratulations, folks. YouTube, Facebook, all platforms have officially canceled us before we even upload this episode.
No wonder I have tiny heat with people.
Right. You have tiny heat with people from being associated with me in any way.
Yes, of course.
That's enough. Okay, so Bischoff orchestrates a meeting with Muhammad Ali. Can we just say the fact that Muhammad Ali is involved in this would be a huge deal if it weren't in North Korea, if it was just, anywhere on Earth?
Yeah.
Muhammad Ali's involvement would have been such a big deal because, I mean, you think about it at this point in time, I mean, he is, I won't even say he's like the Mike Tyson because he's way more famous than Mike Tyson.
Way more.
He's the level of fame he has is like Bruce Lee times Mike Tyson. It's more of a Michael Jordan type fame. You'd have to go to the middle of the desert to find somebody who didn't know who he was at this point in time.
I mean, he had a movie and Will Smith played him.
Right.
So, I mean, that should just tell you something. Here should also tell you something, if I could, real quick. You mentioned Antonio Inoki versus Muhammad Ali, where he mixed boxing with wrestling and everything. That event is so big. Let's put this in perspective. That event is so big, it is still covered today by ESPN.
That's
That's
true.
sports. The legit sports channel actually still considers that a sporting event.
Now
Think of it, but
now thinking about it, I was 20 when this event happened, and you would think that Muhammad Ali being involved with this would have been, and maybe I just wasn't in that circle of watching wrestling, but you would think it would have been a much bigger deal in the United States that Muhammad Ali's involved and they're going to North Korea. Maybe like I said, maybe I just missed it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to do with that. So, for one, I mean, back in the '90s, CNN's like the only international news. So that's really the only place where it would have been covered back then. I mean, especially given the fact that like Americans were not supposed to be in North Korea.
yeah,
And the State Department was not consulted on this. And Bischoff talks about on 83 Weeks how there really could have been political repercussions for this, and how he was kind of counting on Ted Turner to have his back if it all went south. So speaking of political repercussions, hard to talk about politics without thinking about Hulk Hogan. Hey, the greatest politician in the history of wrestling. The line that will go down in infamy. Can't make that one, brother. Heath, what do you think about Hogan's refusal to go?
Probably one of the smartest moves that he had made. Just I think he knew what the deal was. I think he knew the risk outweighed the rewards, and it was one of those times where really put himself first didn't do a lot of damage. But it also showed maybe Hogan was a lot smarter on what the deal was with North Korea than some of these other guys.
Yeah, agreed. Caleb, Inoki said that he was careful. That Hogan was a careful guy. You agree with that? In this instance,
but here's my thing though. When you say that, can you blame him for saying no?
I wouldn't have gone.
I wouldn't have gone either. And and you know me, I watch wrestling anywhere it's presented, right?
Except for North Korea.
Right. Except at a place that could literally kill me watching it, kind of thing. Like, just you hear all the stories about it and stuff like that. And especially at this time, forget nowadays where we are with North Korea and stuff like that. But, back then, especially just, and hearing the stories, and I heard this on 83 Weeks, like Eric Bischoff talked about it, like, they looked at them as like the devil.
Yeah.
Well, maybe Hogan knew that. I don't know. Maybe he just thought that's a little too foreign for me, kind of thing. If I guarantee you, if Inoki would have said, "Hey Hogan, would you do a one-night match with me in Japan?" He'd be like, "Absolutely." He accepted that.
This is probably the time to talk about this. The match, the eventual main event between Inoki and Flair. Really the only match on this entire card that is of note, just because I cannot stand empty arena wrestling, and that's what the rest of it felt like, right? Not only that, but the match with Inoki was amazing.
Yes, it was.
The whole time I'm watching that, I'm thinking, I am so glad it was not Hulk Hogan. Because he would not. I don't think it's up for debate. Hogan would not have carried Inoki to that type of match. There's no way in hell.
I think they've wrestled couple of times. And if you watch some of Hogan's stuff in Japan, like Hogan wrestled Muda over there, I think there's he wrestled and when he was in Japan, he wrestled a totally different style. But I do think at that point in here's the thing, Hogan would not have put Inoki over in North Korea. Hogan's the champ. And to finish that show the way it needed to finish, Inoki was going to have to beat somebody, and that was not going to be Hogan under any circumstances.
You know, I really don't think I want to pin Inoki in front of 100,000 people that think that I'm the devil.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, again,
but here's the thing, that because you asked if they worked a couple of times, and I'm here to tell you, yes, they did work together. They, like, Hogan won the G1 Climax tournament one year and pinned Inoki to do it. That was before he went to WWE. That was when he had his Japan run. He won the G1 Climax tournament and he beat Inoki to do it. So they've done business together. You know, I don't know if he would have, you know, let him go over or whatnot. Probably not. You're right. But here's my question, which was never really answered at the start of this. Who else was asked to go? Because at this time in 95, you had Hogan, but you also had Macho Man Randy Savage. Did they reach out to him to go?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's something that we don't really have the details on.
Yeah.
You know, Savage, I can see them not even asking him. Can you imagine Savage in this sort of scenario? I mean, you know,
Well,
it's hard to imagine Flair in this sort of scenario, but we know that Flair was there. We know, Too Cold Scorpio, Sonny Ono was there. Scott Norton, who, let me just say that this episode of Dark Side of the Ring might be the most significant thing Scott Norton has ever done, because he's like the main speaker. Not to like shit on the man's career, but like nobody's like Scott Norton's my favorite wrestler. Like,
right.
actually,
right.
my stepbrother was a
No.
big fan of his when back when he was actually wrestling in the 90s in WCW. Like, he was a fan of the shoulder breaker.
Yeah, I'm not saying he was bad.
He
Here's
was.
the thing.
I mean, he was a legit walking badass, man. And I think, I think WCW kind of missed out on an opportunity with him. They probably could have done something with him, but
Well, here's the thing. In Japan, Scott Norton was at a very high level because of the style he worked, because he was a legitimate tough guy. He was very believable. So I think you're right. American fans never saw that Japanese side of Scott Norton. They never really got to see him have one of those matches. And I do think one of the great things about the podcast and these documentaries is we do get to see a side of wrestlers that we haven't seen before. And Scott Norton was the winner. I mean, they talk about him on the Dark Side of the Podcast. Conrad Thompson, the producers, the directors, just went on and on and on about their appreciation for Scott Norton, what a great storyteller he was, and how great he was. And I'm telling you, like, Scott Norton, again, not anybody's favorite wrestler. If I saw Scott Norton appearing within 3 hours of here where I live, I'd go pay to meet Scott Norton now, because I'd want to be like, dude, right? No, so hopefully Scott Norton makes some more money off this, and people realize. I mean, I think he was at Starrcast a couple of times, maybe. He like, I can't imagine this episode without him.
Right. This is a great time to bring this up. This is one of the key things I really want to talk about tonight. Someone is very notably absent from this documentary, and that's Ric Flair. So I want to know from both of you guys, why do you think Flair's not here? Is it because of cost? Because at some point in time, we know that there was a decree from Vince McMahon, and he'll never admit or confirm this because that's not Vince. Right, but there's a decree from on high from Vince McMahon. If you're getting Vince's money, you don't go on Dark Side of the Ring. obviously Stone Cold Steve Austin doesn't give a single shit because he's Stone Cold Steve Austin and he can do that.
Yeah.
So
Well,
Money.
they said that on the podcast with Conrad. They said Flair could not appear because of his contract with WWE.
Yeah, they did.
They
that
said
settles
that
it.
on their podcast.
They
Well,
did.
that settles it, and that's something I really wanted to point out here is like Flair. I think other than Scott Norton, I think Flair would have been the only perspective that could have possibly topped his. And even then, you know, they said it. Ric Flair was riding around. He had his own car, his own driver. He wasn't on the bus with everyone else.
Right. They also mentioned that the Steiners basically never got back to him. So they reached out for Scott and Rick Steiner and just kind of got ghosted, so didn't hear from them. I don't want to retract too much, but I'm curious to go back and like, where was Road Warrior Animal? Was he invited to go, or was he hurt during this time? I don't remember. That may have been the time that he was injured and out for a while, and
That
Hawk
was
was teaming with different people.
that was when he and Hawk split for a little bit.
Okay.
That was when that was around at that time. And actually, you talked about the podcast. I believe you're talking about Dark Side of the Podcast. They also told a story about the Steiners. They said the Steiners actually never went to North Korea. Well, actually, no, they did go to North Korea, I think, but they didn't go to where they went. Like, they weren't a part of the show, but they had a grill out, and apparently some people thought that they were cannibals.
Wait, but the Steiners were on the show.
Were
Yeah,
they?
they wrestle on the show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot. Like,
Maybe they didn't stay at the same hotel or something with the rest of them.
I think
that could
that's
have been it.
yeah. I think that's what it was. Never mind. I don't know why I thought that they weren't on the show for whatever reason, but
I was going to say they were the semi-main on the second night,
Well,
right before Inoki and Flair.
I'm stupid.
Well, I mean, speaking of, I would love to see Scott Steiner on Dark Side of the Ring. Maybe an episode about math. Just in general. I don't know that. I mean, I would love for them to get Scott Steiner going. They should do an episode about, you know, whether there's a WWE Hall of Fame or not, and have Scott Steiner for an hour. Just talk about that. So the flight over there, let's talk about that for a second. You know, you can't book a flight. You can't go on Delta.com and book a flight to Pyongyang. So basically what happens is you have to reach out to the State Department in North Korea, and they say, you go to this place and we'll come and pick you up. And that's how you get to Pyongyang.
Yeah.
And so they're on this military transport. Scott Norton says it's from the 40s. I really hope that was an exaggeration.
I don't think it was.
Yeah, I mean,
It was definitely a World War II plane, they said.
Yeah, more than likely. I mean, you got to think, like, the aircraft was invented in 1903. like, you know, like the little Wright brothers planes, you know, the Wright Flyers. So, yeah, I mean, you got to think, based on that, this plane was probably rough. And, you know, you've especially got Ric Flair, who has probably flown first class all over the world, you know. You get on the plane, they get you nice and buckled in before they let the peasants on. They serve you drinks, and then this is probably it's probably like a 5-row, 5 seats to a row, bucket seats, may or may not have been seat belts, and the thing probably.
Yeah, I think they said there were no seat belts, that the beer was served scalding hot. Yeah, it was. I'm curious though if they flew to one of the Asian countries and then flew to North Korea from there. Like, I'm curious how long this flight was, because this is not a plane that's going to go across an ocean, I wouldn't think. Just so many questions I have about this.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think about like what would even be needed for the North Koreans to even be able to land that plane somewhere else.
Right.
Because
Right.
most places it's like, we will shoot down a North Korean plane, no
Right.
questions asked.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, who knows, man? I'm
Man,
guessing they flew straight there though, is what I'm thinking.
and here's the thing: Flair has been in a plane crash,
That's true.
so his nerves and probably a little, what's it called, PTS or something like that, or
PTSD. Yeah.
yeah, PTSD. I couldn't think further, but PTSD kicked in probably because I bet you when they were up in the air, the plane kept shaking.
Oh, for sure. There was probably a ton of turbulence, and with no seat belts,
Yep.
I mean, you're gripping the seat the whole time. So they get there. Everybody's passports get taken. If you've got a Walkman at the time, or a book, or a magazine, or any of that stuff, it's gone. No American, they probably viewed it as American propaganda. None of that allowed over here. At this point in time, we have to remember, it's easy to go, knowing what we know about North Korea today. It's easy to go, these people were idiots. But you got to think, most of them back then didn't know anything about North Korea at all. Because
Right.
there wasn't news coverage of North Korea. There wasn't, there wasn't like The Interview and movies about North Korea. It just wasn't a thing. And so you hear that it's like a communist country, but if you don't know what that is, and you don't really know anything about them, you get over there and you're not understanding that these people could put a bullet in your head and there will be no repercussions whatsoever.
Nope.
Because the United States is not going to invade and risk like nuclear war over some people that they didn't approve to be there and advised not to go in the first place.
Yeah.
And it really starts to set in. Bischoff says he's only the 7th American to step foot in North Korea without being like a prisoner of war or something.
Yeah. Without being shot down or captured.
Yeah.
That's what he was told.
Yeah.
He even told that story on 83 Weeks.
Yeah, he did. And you also look at them having the military stationed outside the rooms. So you can watch North Korean political propaganda on 3 different channels, or you can stare at the wall. Personally, I would have gone insane. Because you got to think, there's no smartphone, and if there was, there wouldn't be any service. You don't have anything.
No, they would have taken your phone.
Right. You don't have anything. There's no coverage in North Korea, even if you kept the phone. You got nothing. I guess you could, if you got a pen and a paper, you could scribble down stuff or draw or something. It sounded like the days leading up to the actual event were just absolutely miserable. And you've got all these guys. We have to remember, these are pro wrestlers. They are used to carrying on and going to bars and, drinking until 2 a.m. And some of them clearly, probably were having withdrawals from several substances, as we often find out on Dark Side of the Ring. Heath, what do you think about this whole scenario, about their, living conditions?
It had to be. I mean, I can't imagine. You land and they open up all your luggage and they take your passport and you just have no idea. And you have there's no way they could have even started to be mentally prepared for what they were going to face, that they were going to have basically chaperones with them the whole time. They were not going to have any freedom. Like, I was pretty surprised. Bischoff talks on the episode. He talks about running, and then who was it? Was it Norton and Benoit, or Scorpio and Benoit? Leaving, or no? They were talking about it on the podcast how they were ditching their escorts, but like the streets over there, it's like an 8-lane street, and so to cross the street, you got to get under these underground tunnels. and how it's like, you
Yep.
think about that. You're ditching your state appointed escort and going into an underground tunnel to escape them. I mean, this is out of a horror movie, if you ask me. So they're very, I mean, Norton talks about it. They're very fortunate that there wasn't an international incident. They came very close a couple of times. It's like you said, you go insane. You go insane. And man, just they're very blessed that nothing like that happened.
I mean, the ball flying off the pool table seemed like it was close enough.
How great
Right.
was that reenactment too of that?
That was great. What do you what did you think about it, Caleb? What you're in Korea, North Korea? What are you doing for 4 days? You know,
You know me, I wouldn't have lasted long because someone said I couldn't watch wrestling on my phone. I'll be like, yeah, I'm out. I'm done. Like
y'all got the WWE Network on here, which in '95 wouldn't have
well, it's
existed.
true. So like in '95, I don't know what I would have done. I'll be honest. When I heard about the plane ride, I was like, I wouldn't have even gotten on the plane. I'd have turned around and been like, you know what? I'm gonna catch the flight out of Japan to USA. I'm going back home. Like
They would have had me at the plane situation too, because this is going to sound probably really bougie and awful, but I don't fly coach at all. Like, I don't fly economy. I don't do it. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have lasted on this plane at all. I would have been
yeah,
like, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna catch the first plane back to the States. Thanks, guys.
yeah, and I don't do well with flights to begin with that much, but just from the turbulence alone, I would not have made it and stuff like that. So yeah, just hearing the stories too and seeing what situations they were in, and yet they still tried to keep escalating it. Like like they kept fighting amongst each other and everything. Like this sounded like an action movie. Like it's like if Hollywood produced a script of this, I think we've often joked about this, but if Hollywood produced a script of this, people would go, "Oh, that's stupid. That's corny." And then you look and it actually happened. Like
Right.
like it just sounds like how the hell did this happen? Like how did you guys survive? I can tell you probably one of the things that they did was probably a Noki. Anoki was probably the one that kept everyone out of trouble, basically. Like it's like when they would hear that he probably heard that you know they got in trouble or something like that, and then they would go to Anoki and he would try and talk to him or something like that.
If one of them had been smart, and they talked about on the podcast about Muhammad Ali just basically begging Hawk to cut promos the entire plane ride.
Yeah.
But if I'm in that situation, I'm thinking, okay, Muhammad Ali's getting on this plane. Muhammad Ali is a global treasure. Nothing is going to happen to Muhammad Ali. So I am going to sit close to Muhammad Ali, and I am going to stay within 5 feet of him this entire trip until we go to our separate rooms, because nothing bad is going to happen to Muhammad Ali, because that would create an international. So if Muhammad Ali goes to this restaurant, I'm going to this restaurant. And I mean, of course, they weren't thinking like that, because they're used to being all alpha males, and now they're being manhandled by their escorts and the military people, and it just caught these guys off guard. It was a recipe for disaster.
And think about this too. Sonny Ono, who is in this as well. And by the way, I want that shirt that Sonny Ono was wearing of him as the cartoon guy. I want that shirt. So if anyone find me that shirt, I want it. But he even confirmed what Bischoff said, because Bischoff said it on 83 Weeks. He said that they were literally told by their Ashantes, or however you say it, or the Ashantes, they were literally told by them, "You are not allowed to rape our women."
Yeah. Yeah.
He said, by the way, don't rape our women. I was like, really? Like, think about that. Think about if you're driving, you're already in a foreign country, and you are said, oh, by the way, you're not allowed to rape our women. And what do you say after that? Just
So
okay.
so I can't remember which comedian it is, but there's a joke that goes like this, where what's the difference between a cult and a religion? And in a cult, there's a guy who he knows everything's phony and he made it all up and he knows that, and nobody else does. And in a religion, that guy's dead. And that's the difference. That's the joke. Anyway, in North Korea, it's kind of the same thing. The propaganda has gone on for so long, for forever, right? So these people, the people there, are repeating the propaganda to the next generation there, and the generation that came up with it all has been gone for 2 generations. It's just a fact, And with the Japanese, it stems from the fact that the Japanese were once colonizers, basically. They had kind of the same relationship with North Korea that the British had with half the world, and that created bad tension between them. With the United States, it's a whole different scenario where the embracing of technology and capitalism and things like that, where their government kind of created propaganda against the United States. So when people are fed this all day, every day, you're not going to encounter anybody that knows the difference. You're not going to encounter a single person. Like, the fact that, to them, that Japanese people were rapists is a fact. It's not propaganda to them, and that's horrifying, but also, I mean, it's the scenario. I think
they also I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
But, they also believe, and Bischoff said this, they believe that North Korea won World War II over there. People believe that over there.
I didn't even know they were in World War II.
Yeah. Yeah, they believe that they were responsible for the end of World War II, that it was the Japanese fault. It was America had something to do with it and stuff like that. And then they also told Bischoff that too. You're not allowed to rape our women, which is when, that's why when he just goes out for a regular jog, he's just thinking, hey, I'm just going to go out for a jog, something that we do every day in America and even in Japan. Not so much over there. Because he ran and he was like Moses. He parted the seas of people.
Yeah.
Like,
people were legitimately scared of him.
Yeah, he was enemy number 1. So just,
well, it's a good thing they brought Muhammad Ali and not Bill Cosby.
That was terrible.
It's not the worst joke I've made on here.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Okay, so it's time to talk about this. All right, the Too Cold Scorpio and Hawk thing. It's kind of the B plot of the episode, and I wanted to wait and just. It's kind of dispersed throughout the episode, but I wanted to just wait and cover it all at one time. Okay, so on pretty much all of these, there's a point where we talk about like the people that are talking. The people they're interviewing, the guests they have on the show, are they being truthful or not? I think that pretty much everybody is. Maybe Inoki might have skirted the truth on a few things, right? But the people that I wonder about here, first I want to say, the first person they ask about it, really, Bischoff. Do you guys think he knew about it? Do you think he was being truthful when they asked him if he knew about this scenario?
I don't know, because I mean, maybe yes and no. Maybe he just heard that, hey, they had a little argument. Maybe he didn't hear the extent of it or something like that. Because again, there probably wasn't much communication. It seemed like the only time that these guys were able to get together and communicate was when they were at the event. probably to go over the show. And I doubt there was very much communication there. It seemed like they were held closely to the vest. So maybe he didn't, I don't know if he didn't know anything completely about it, but I don't know. Sometimes with Bischoff, it's hard to tell.
Was the only actual physicality between Hawk and Scorpio on the bus? Because it would make sense that Bischoff's not on the bus, Flair's not on the bus, that it's just some of the other workers on the bus. And so Bischoff's not there to see kind of the main physical. I will say I do think Too Cold Scorpio believes everything he said. And I think he told the truth about, sharpening the chopsticks and all of that.
That was so freaking.
But
that was so crazy.
But you got to think at that point in time, Scorpio is just getting his foot in the door, whereas the Road Warriors, they're kind of on the way down a little bit. At that point, Hawk's in bad health, and so Scorpio's not backing down from anybody because he knows in that business you can't let anybody walk over you. But Norton was right. Like Norton's like, man, does Scorpio really think that he could have beat a healthy Hawk? Because that's delusional. And I 100% agree. I mean, you hear all the stories about Hawk at that point in his career, just one of the meanest, roughest, just as much punches, look at you kind of guys. But then, he goes to him at the end, man, I didn't have my medicine. I hadn't been myself. But it's like Scorpio just didn't want to let it go. And it's like Scorpio's reveling like, yeah, you got a leg up on a guy that had hepatitis. Like, okay, you don't win anything.
Right. There was a confrontation in the hallway too, but I don't think they interacted. Like people pulled him apart.
Right.
I just think that like it was far fetched to me, and I'm a huge Bischoff fan, so let me put that out there. I might be the number one Eric Bischoff fan that you know.
I might right? Close second.
Yeah, I mean I'm just a huge fan of Eric Bischoff, but he definitely lied in the Pillman episode, right? Yes. We covered that where Pillman got him. Pillman worked him. So it just, to me, it was a scenario where it's like, is it really possible that he never heard anything about this until right at the time they filmed this episode? And I think that's incredibly far out. That no one's mentioned it, that, because, I mean, obviously Scott Norton's probably talked about it. Too Cold Scorpio was talking about it for probably a decade after. You telling me it never got back around to Bischoff? That to me, I mean, it's hard to believe. It's not impossible, but it is hard to believe. Yeah, I mean, the fact that he was sharpening the chopsticks, and of all people, Chris Benoit's like, nah, man, don't kill that guy.
Oh, come on.
What? That's what happened.
I do want to go back and watch the Scorpio Benoit match. I want to go back and watch that. See,
they had some bangers in the States.
It's a damn good match. But you know how we talked about Scott Norton's definitely the star of this.
Yeah,
but I've got to put Too Cold Scorpio right behind him. Too Cold Scorpio in this was tremendous. And then after him would have to be Bischoff, and then it would go Sonny Ono and Inoki. Like,
I'm not going to disagree with you. I just felt like that's all Scorpio talked about. Like, did he talk about anything on this episode? He didn't talk about being in North Korea. The only thing he talked about was his confrontations with Hawk. And so I felt like it would have been nice to hear about his match or the accommodations or what was it like being in North Korea. It's like, no, I beat up Hawk.
Well,
okay, all right.
Well, they might have, he might have said more in like.
That's very true. Very true.
some of the other interview, but because this was such a big part of it, they had to focus on that as well. Because he was talking about other things, like he saw the stadium and it was bigger than what he ever thought. He's in the crowd, like they showed him sitting in a crowd of North Koreans. There's Too Cold Scorpio. Like what?
And so, just in case somehow Too Cold Scorpio ends up watching this, I want to make it very clear that I do believe Too Cold Scorpio is absolutely legitimate tough guy, not one to be messed with. I don't want it to sound like I'm trying to say he couldn't have taken Hawk. So I just want to, for the record, Too Cold Scorpio, legitimate tough guy.
Probably killed him.
Let me tell you, Heath, if anybody more famous than Brian Pillman Jr. watches these, I'm in tons of trouble. They won't be coming for you. It'll be me. Tony Deppen would have kicked in my door already.
And by the way, real quick before we go on, since he just mentioned that, he's in a brand new faction in Ring of Honor that's like a high faction in Ring of Honor. And even better, he just beat Tracy for the TV belt.
I don't know why. I don't know why you decided to fill me in on this in the middle of a podcast. We got several hours of this going on later. I'm going to be in a terrible mood for the entire rest of the night. Thank you.
So y'all are gonna have to give me backstory on Tony Deppen later on.
No, I'm not even going to get into it.
So just to very briefly outline it, we covered the Ring of Honor Pure Tournament. And,
gotcha.
And he was in it, and I said that it consisted of 15 wrestlers and Tony Deppen. And there was also this very long rant that I went on about him. We were not pleased with his match. I left Caleb speechless, and that's never happened to me ever in my entire life. So, that's a good one to check out.
I wasn't expecting the hate, but then now he's actually in a top position in Ring of Honor. So,
Well, you better be careful because he's a golden boy in parts of Georgia and Tennessee. He's very beloved. So
I wouldn't want to piss off anybody
will get him
in Georgia wrestling.
I mean, I
today.
don't have a problem with him as much as James did. Let's put it that way. Like, I didn't completely trash him.
No, he didn't. But it was bad. Anyway, moving on. Dark Side of the Ring. Nobody watches Ring of Honor. It's fine. So we've got the whole thing where Too Cold Scorpio, is going off. And I do want to point out, I agree with you, like, as far as, like, Scott Norton's the star, and then right after him, it's Too Cold Scorpio. But watching Too Cold Scorpio talk was kind of like watching New Jack or Nick Gage talk. It was like, I'm entertained, but I don't believe you. I think you believe you, but I don't believe you. That being said, so we get up to the actual event. This is every wrestling promoter's dream, to be able to force 170,000 people to come to the venue under threat of death.
If they paid.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, this is a thing. It's a communist country, so North Korea says, "Hey, we're going to build this giant arena." Well, what are we going to do there? We're going to build this giant arena. And then it's like, okay, well, we got this giant arena. All right, well, now we got to come up with things to do in it. So we're going to do this. Oh, and you're coming. Everybody's coming. The arena's going to be filled.
Well, that doesn't make them any different than a lot of other independent wrestling promoters that are not worried about making money. So.
Heath, I love you, man. I really do.
And he's got the Stone Cold face.
He does. And the Star Wars hat, which I greatly appreciate.
With a shirt that says Wrestling Pastor.
I got the full. I figured this outfit would be appropriate for this show. Anyway, 100 whatever thousand people, and the wrestlers don't. The wrestlers have no idea that nobody in the crowd knows anything about wrestling. Doesn't know who any of them are. And to be honest, the only reason they relate to Antonio Inoki, and again, I'm making an assumption here, is that Antonio Inoki is Asian, and they can relate to him, and they want him to win.
Well, so there, there was a couple of things, right? Like, so his mentor, was it
Ricky Dozan.
Ricky Dozan.
Yep.
So he had that tie to it because there had been this like North Korean like folklore. So what really happened here, and this is how deep this divide was, is Ricky Dozan has to hide the fact that he's North Korean for his entire life, basically. And, he gets to the point where he's kind of in his like older years, and he's like, things politically are sorting out a little bit, and, maybe I don't have to like live in fear of this forever, but it gets out that he is in fact North Korean, and the Yakuza killed him. Straight up.
Yeah.
And so in North Korea, of course, they turn this into this propaganda piece where it's like he was brutally murdered by these Japanese savages, which of course, I mean, he was brutally murdered by some evil people, but they're like, and with his dying breaths, he pledges his eternal, faith to North Korea or whatever, his allegiance to North Korea, which of course that didn't happen. And so, yeah, I mean, they spin the story that, I mean, well, the very real story that Inoki is his like, trainee, or Ricky Dozan was his mentor.
I mean, he refers to him as master.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's who trained him, and obviously he was a damn good trainer because Inoki is like the most famous guy in Japan ever, to an extent. So as far as wrestling goes,
on our show, talking, Mark Whitman is a student of wrestling and has forgotten more about wrestling than I know, and he talks about Ricky Dozan just like on a level like. You think about the great. I mean, we're not talking about Hogan. We're talking about you go back to Luthez, like some of the greats from the early 1900s, like the real legit tough guys, and like that Ricky Dozan was just legit, and I mean just all time. If you do an all time wrestling Mount Rushmore, has to be on there, and they talked about that while they were in North Korea. I think they visited like his childhood home, and like Ricky Dozan is a hero in North Korea. So, yeah, Inoki is not taking the pen at this show under any circumstances.
right? And so he's got that connection, but other than that, I mean, you just had to think about how bizarre this had to be. Not only, all right, so most of these people have never seen a non-North Korean person in their lives. They've certainly never seen a non-Asian person in their lives. So now, you've got all these different nationalities coming over. You've got these big, hulking bodybuilders, and they're out there beating the tar out of each other. You have women performers out there in what the North Koreans must have thought was like the skimpiest, sluttiest outfits they'd ever seen. And they're out there beating the tar out of each other.
Yeah.
And not to mention, they have no idea what professional wrestling is. It
Right.
was probably very easy to work these people. I mean, from the extent of getting them to believe that it was real. Working them as in getting them to react is something else. Because this is foreign and alien. And these folks are used to being told when to cheer for things. It's like, we're having another military parade today. When the military walks by, you clap. And that's it. And that's the extent of it. So, it just had to have been so awkward.
Yeah.
And then, at the end of it, finally, Inoki and Flair are able to make something happen here. I did watch the match, and I thought that even given the, I mean, I think that this particular match, and they probably had other matches, I'm sure, but I think this particular match would have gotten over big anywhere.
Yeah.
But when Inoki got that pin, I mean, that place, the roof came off.
Yeah, it did. It was insane. The matchup was a work of art, man. Just it solidified to me watching it. I'm just like, not only was Inoki amazing, and I don't think he is appreciated as much as he should be here in America. Especially if you love New Japan Pro Wrestling today, New Japan Pro Wrestling is bigger than it ever has been in its entire existence. But it started with Inoki. So if Inoki never started it, there would be no New Japan Pro Wrestling to this day and everything like that. But it not only showed how good Inoki was, it showed just how great Ric Flair was as well. Because when Ric Flair got out there, he realized, okay, I got to get Inoki over. That's all he had to worry about. I mean, think about it. Ric Flair is the greatest of all time here in America. Many could argue, I'm just saying, and everything like that. And he really showed how good he was, man. The matchup was awesome. It was amazing. I loved it.
I will say this. The only person that I could think of, even in 95, that could have had a better match with Inoki, that could have gotten a bigger reaction, is Terry Funk. But again, maybe in Japan, but again, yeah, Flair. And they, can you imagine? They weren't in the back. They didn't have the whole match laid out. Flair gets out there and he's like, okay, these people are going to make me work for it. And he does. And because he's Ric Flair. And yeah, although I want to go back. I watched the finish a couple of times. And the finish was just really weird because he hits him with this kind of like, he does like a spinning heel kick. Then he does the knee off the top. Then he gets him back up and hits the whatever the kick to the back of the head. Enziguri. I just remember it from the pro wrestling game on Nintendo. That was the Japanese wrestler's finishing move. He kicked the guy in the back of the head. But and then it's just over, and Flair just sells it and lays there, doesn't move, and yeah, it's just good, just good stuff.
Well, Inoki was known for the enziguri and stuff like that. So that was
kind of kick.
yeah. He was known for that kind of stuff. So his would actually be a finish, whereas today it's literally just a comeback spot and stuff like that. So I mean, that just goes to show you where wrestling is and stuff like that. Ric Flair wrestled that way. Anytime he wrestled anywhere, if his match was not he was not leaving that ring until his match got over. And that's why every single matchup that you find from Ric Flair gets over one way or the other. It doesn't matter if it had the stupidest storyline to it or not. It was going to get over.
Yeah. I mean, true words never spoken. Well, we are running a little long here, guys. So before we get going, Caleb, you got any final thoughts on this one?
Man, well, first of all, I gotta say, man, this one, the Pillman, the Nick Gage, all of the other stuff, this might be the best Dark Side of the Ring has ever done, man. The episodes so far have just been great. Like I said, if I was to rate the stars in this episode, it would go Scott Norton. He showed me something in this episode, and it was just him telling stories, but he was great. He was entertaining as hell. And then next would come Too Cold Scorpio. You could say about whatever you want about his story, but just the way he was talking in this, I love the line where he was just like, I mean, you look out in the crowd, you didn't even have to be high to trip off that. That was the greatest line ever. So I loved him in that. But next one, I loved Bischoff in this episode when he was talking at the beginning of this, the way that you could tell being on 83 weeks, he's become so much better at like being more entertaining and talking rather than just ranting and stuff like that. So he was great. And then of course, Sonny Ono. And by the way, if you heard a ding in this episode, it was because Heath Mullikin there just sent me from Pro Wrestling Tees the shirt. So I'm gonna buy that. I'm gonna buy that shirt, and it is going to come on this episode. Well, not on this episode, but it's gonna come on this show one time. I'm gonna wear it.
I was gonna say that's gonna be some hella shipping.
It's gonna be amazing because
the Amazon drone is gonna fly it through the window, drop it on the table for you.
But he's got the shirt. So yeah, man. Look, the event is weird. It's so weird to think about. Like it's so weird to think about. Out of everyone in America that you could think of that has stepped foot in North Korea, pro wrestling was held in North Korea. Think about that. Football is probably considered the biggest sport in America. Maybe baseball, that could be debated, whatever. Sporting events, though, are the biggest things in America. Those events have not even stepped foot in North Korea, but yet pro wrestling did.
Professional basketball, but that's the exception, and that was later. It was way later.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And that's just because Kim Jong-un is obsessed with Dennis Rodman.
Yeah. I forgot about that, but
it was way later than this.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, some of the biggest celebrities in the world have never stepped foot in North Korea. Some of the biggest politicians have never stepped foot in North Korea. Pro wrestling was over there. Think about that. Pro wrestling. And they witnessed one of the greatest matches of all time that nobody really talks about.
Yeah. It is definitely incredible.
And here's the thing. In the history books, it's over there in North Korea that pro wrestling was held over there. Like, that's in their history and everything like that. It was crazy to think about that it was covered by CNN. It's just it's crazy to think about. And the matches weren't that bad, except, people didn't know what they were watching. But again, if anybody wants to check out this event, I would suggest just one matchup, Inoki versus Flair. That's all you need to see. And then it's just like, okay.
The history books probably say pro wrestlers and Muhammad Ali came over from the United States to pay tribute to our fallen leader. Probably. And they also had a show, an event of some kind. And then that's it. That's probably all it says.
It probably was, but just for the fact of that they're over there. I mean, you listen to this episode and you're just like, man, again, Hollywood couldn't come up with a script for this. Like it's so crazy to think about. But dude, I absolutely loved the episode from start to finish. I like the story, the event itself. I mean, it's one that at least has a happy ending. Like, everyone went home. Basically, that's what like that's the good thing about this. It wasn't so dark. I love the music that they used for this. I just loved everything about this. This was great.
I mean, this is the first episode this season to, one, not feature a viral pro wrestling performer, and two, no one died.
Yeah.
So
could have now.
Yeah. They could have. They definitely could have.
And Scott Norton could still be there to this day.
And we're only on the technicality that someone died in the last episode because Nick Gage was technically dead for 7 minutes. That being said, Heath, man, what's your closing thoughts on this one?
So, I think Scott Norton definitely kind of the star of the show, and again, this opens up a whole second life for Scott Norton, because now we've all seen a side of him that has been protected. So I think that's awesome, man. Give me the Scott Norton shoot interview. That's what I want. But here's the thing. and they mentioned this on their podcast. Antonio Inoki was getting ready to film for something else. And that's the thing. You think about all the knowledge and the history and the stories that Antonio Inoki has that we have never heard. And it just doesn't happen. And he's getting older. And it's like, oh my goodness, what if this opens the door into this gateway of hearing about Ricky Dojan and hearing about New Japan Pro Wrestling, and hearing about when Baba forms All Japan Pro Wrestling, hearing all of that from Antonio Inoki himself, that could be, man, it'd be a whole nother wrestling industry. I mean, it'd be pretty awesome. But I mean, I've heard, obviously you hear Bischoff every week. Oh no, you hear some, but again, those two guys for me, Norton and Inoki, just because they don't do this sort of thing. So that was really awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I'm right there with you. I mean, if you would have told me a week ago, okay, Scott Norton's going to be at Dragon Con this year. He's going to do a panel. I'd have been like, cool. Well, I guess I could sleep in that day. Now I would be like first in line. I'd be like, we got to get there early for that. I'd want to sit in the front row. I want to see him be involved in more things. I want to hear stories from his perspective because he is a great orator. And the same thing that you said about Inoki is it's like, I really hope that somebody sits down with him and gets all this stuff out of his head, because when he's inevitably gone, we won't, that stuff will just be lost. Because he has a perspective that we can't even comprehend at this point in time. Because the man he has forgotten more incredible pieces of wrestling history than we have seen.
Yeah. And again, like I go back to what I said earlier. I don't think people appreciate just how much he has done for wrestling. Right. I mean, what all he has done in wrestling. It's kind of like Jim Crockett in ways, Jim Crockett does not get near the credit he deserves for the success of the NWA and for the success of Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, and, WCW and stuff like that, in its early days, obviously. So Antonio Inoki, is right up there. Again, if, the success of New Japan Pro Wrestling to this day, right? It would not have mattered if Inoki had not started it himself, if he had not come up with the G1 Climax, if he had not come up with Wrestle Kingdom. That was his idea, that's it, the big, huge event now that everyone talks about. He came up with that. Just a bunch of stuff he is responsible for in Japan. And again, Hulk Hogan, who became the biggest draw in wrestling history, or one of them at least, Inoki put him over in the G1 Climax.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot here, man. This episode is 44 minutes, and it's dense. I mean, we only really talked about the major things.
Yeah.
There were so many other items that we could have talked about, and definitely, check out Dark Side of the Podcast. Check out 83 Weeks if you want to hear more and more about this, because I think it's going to be a topic of conversation for a while now. Now that Dark Side of the Ring, they have this way of shining a light on things that are not only unique or terrifying or horrific in the wrestling business, but also things that aren't at the forefront of like people's thoughts about wrestling. And also giving us a different perspective, because most of what we've all been exposed to is from the WWE perspective and the official, company bottom line, which is probably that this event never happened.
I would suggest people go watch the event itself. I mean, it is a spectacle.
Available on YouTube.
Yeah, that's true. It's out there, folks, for sure. That being said, Caleb, man, thank you for joining us here each and every week. We have a plethora of things this season
Yeah.
that we're going to cover. And I do agree with you. I think so far, this is probably the best season of Dark Side of the Ring.
Yeah.
They have mastered their art, and they continue to be ahead of everyone else. And I think they're just getting better and better. All being said, Heath, absolutely, man. I'm so happy that we were able to get you on here to talk about some Dark Side of the Ring. Thank you, brother. Let everybody know where they can check you out, hear your voice, etc.
Double
Don't
drop
give them your OnlyFans. We don't need that.
I haven't branched out into that. DoubleDropkick.com is where you can listen to our podcast. We talk about the wrestling you grew up with, the wrestling you need to watch now and stuff. But if you go to patreon.com/DoubleDropkick, I would say we do more coverage of Carolinas and Georgia wrestling. I mean, it's pretty much most weeks, it's 5 days a week that we're covering local independent wrestling. It is insane. Probably I am insane for doing it, but if you like that kind of stuff, and it's the dark side of the ring for independent wrestling. So yeah, patreon.com/DoubleDropkick, and hey, this has been a blast. So thank you guys for having me.
I was going to bring up that I myself am a patron of the Double Dropkick Show, and it is worth every single penny. I feel like I talk to you more than I actually do because your voice is playing in my car so often. I have the same experience with Ace from the Superhero Homies, who's on here a lot. It's either your voice or his in my car pretty much all the time, unless I'm like reviewing episodes of this podcast. So, I feel like I talk to you guys all the time, even though we really don't talk that much. That being said, we're going to wrap this one on up. This episode, we're filming this late on the night of the 26th. It should be on audio platforms by tomorrow morning, and then the video will be up sometime probably like noon or afternoon tomorrow on the 27th. So this one's going to go up pretty quickly, and then of course stay tuned. We're going to have our coverage of A&E's biography episode on Shawn Michaels coming out. That being said, Caleb, Heath, thank you for being here. This has been an Involved Review.